These were strategic, determined leaders who understood the threat they faced and fought with everything they had. But they faced overwhelming odds. For most of the 19th century, European control in Africa was limited to coastal regions. The interior, what Europeans called darkest Africa, remained largely unknown to them. Disease, difficult terrain, and strong African kingdoms kept Europeans at bay. But European explorers began mapping Africa's rivers and lakes. David Livingstone, Henry Morton Stanley, and others trekked through the continent, sending back reports of vast resources and uncivilized peoples in need of salvation. These explorers were celebrated as heroes in Europe, but they were also scouts, preparing the way for conquest. By the 1870s, European traders and missionaries had established small outposts. Tensions began to rise as European powers competed for influence. Then came the trigger: Leopold's Congo scheme, and with it the Berlin Conference. In November 1884, representatives from 14 European nations gathered in Berlin. The conference was organized by German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck and was officially called the Congo Conference. The stated purpose: to regulate European colonization and trade in Africa, prevent conflicts between European powers, and promote civilization on the continent. The real purpose: to divide Africa among themselves without going to war. No African representatives were invited, not a single one. Over 3 months, European diplomats negotiated, argued, and bargained. They drew borders on maps using rivers, mountains, and arbitrary lines of longitude and latitude. They ignored ethnic groups, kingdoms, and historical territories. The conference established several key principles. 1. Effective occupation. A European power could only claim a territory if it could prove effective control through administration and military presence. 2. Free trade zones. Certain regions like the Congo Basin were declared free trade zones open to all European merchants. 3. Notification. Any nation claiming new African territory had to notify the others to avoid conflict. The result? Africa was carved up like a birthday cake. Britain took the largest share, France took the second largest, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, Italy, and Spain divided the rest. By the time the conference ended in February 1885, the stage was set for the most rapid and brutal phase of colonization in human history. With the rules established, European powers moved swiftly. Britain expanded aggressively in southern, eastern, and western Africa. Cecil Rhodes, backed by the British South Africa Company, pushed into what would become Rhodesia, modern-day Zimbabwe and Zambia. British forces invaded Egypt in 1882 and gradually extended control up the Nile into Sudan. France launched military campaigns across West and Central Africa. French forces defeated the Tukulor Empire, conquered the kingdoms of Dahomey and Borg, and pushed into the Sahara and Sahel regions. Germany claimed Togoland, Cameroon, German East Africa, Tanganyika, and German Southwest Africa, Namibia. German colonial rule was marked by extreme violence, including the genocide of the Herero and Nama peoples in Namibia. Portugal solidified its hold on Angola and Mozambique, brutally suppressing local resistance. Italy attempted to invade Ethiopia in 1895 but was humiliated at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, a stunning victory for Emperor Menelik II that preserved Ethiopian independence. Belgium, or rather King Leopold, personally tightened his grip on the Congo. Forced labor camps, mutilations, and mass killings turned the Congo into a death zone. Millions died. But Africans did not surrender quietly. Samori Touré fought a mobile guerrilla war against the French. He retreated, regrouped, and struck back. For 16 years, he resisted French expansion. moving his entire empire eastward and even establishing diplomatic relations with the British. He was finally captured in 1898. The Ashanti Empire in modern-day Ghana resisted British invasion multiple times. The British finally defeated the Ashanti in 1900, but only after fierce battles and the courageous leadership of Queen Mother Yaa Asantewaa. The Zulu Kingdom fought the British in a series of wars. At Isandlwana in 1879, Zulu warriors killed over 1,300 British soldiers in one of the most shocking defeats in British military history. But superior British firepower eventually overwhelmed the Zulu. The Mahdist forces in Sudan defeated an Egyptian-British army led by General Charles Gordon in 1885. The Mahdist State survived until 1898, when British forces armed with machine guns massacred thousands at the Battle of Omdurman. In German East Africa, the Maji Maji Rebellion, 1905 to 1907, saw diverse ethnic groups unite against German rule. The Germans responded with a scorched earth policy, burning villages and poisoning water sources. Over 300,000 Africans died. Each resistance movement was met with overwhelming violence. European powers used starvation, disease, and massacres to crush opposition. By 1900, the map of Africa had been almost entirely redrawn. Only two nations remained independent: Ethiopia and Liberia. European colonial administrations began to establish control. They built railways to extract resources. They imposed taxes to force Africans into wage labor. They divided ethnic groups and imposed foreign languages, laws, and customs. Borders drawn in Berlin cut through kingdoms, splitting families and communities. The Yoruba people found themselves divided between British Nigeria and French Dahomey. The Somali people were split among British Somaliland, Italian Somaliland, French Somaliland, and Ethiopia. The Congo people found themselves on opposite sides of the Congo River under Belgian and French rule. These artificial borders ignored centuries of history, culture, and identity. They would become sources of conflict for generations to come. Meanwhile, European powers competed for dominance. Britain and France nearly went to war over a remote outpost in Sudan in 1898 during the Fashoda incident. Tensions between European empires grew, but the scramble itself was over. By 1914, the eve of World War I, Africa had been conquered. One of the great lies of the scramble was the idea that Africa was an empty land waiting to be filled. European maps often labeled vast regions as unexplored or uninhabited. But these lands were not empty. They were home to millions of people with complex societies, trade networks, and governance systems. The myth of emptiness was used to justify theft. Not all Africans resisted European conquest. Some African leaders, traders, and soldiers collaborated with the European powers either out of self-interest, coercion, or the belief that cooperation would protect their people. European colonial armies relied heavily on African soldiers. The French used Senegalese tirailleurs. The British recruited from Kenya, Uganda, and West Africa. Africans fought Africans in wars orchestrated by Europeans. This collaboration was often born of desperation. Some leaders believed that allying with Europeans would protect them from rival African kingdoms. Others were tricked or bribed, but their cooperation helped European powers conquer the continent. The violence of the scramble was often hidden from European publics. Newspapers celebrated colonial expansion as a civilizing mission, but the reality was brutal. In the Congo, King Leopold's agents forced villagers to harvest rubber under threat of mutilation or death. Hands were cut off as punishment for failing to meet quotas. Conservative estimates suggest that 10 million Congolese people died under Leopold's rule. In Namibia, German forces exterminated the Herero and Nama peoples in what is now recognized as the first genocide of the 20th century. Survivors were driven into the desert to die of thirst. In Algeria, French colonial forces used mass killings, forced displacement, and land confiscation to crush resistance. These atrocities were not anomalies, they were the norm. The scramble was fundamentally about profit. European companies extracted raw materials, gold, diamonds, rubber, ivory, palm oil, while forcing Africans into unpaid or underpaid labor. Railways were built not to benefit Africans, but to transport goods from the interior to ports for export to Europe. Taxes were imposed to force Africans to work in mines and plantations. Traditional economies were destroyed. The wealth extracted from Africa fueled European development, but Africa itself was impoverished. European colonizers didn't just steal land and resources, they attempted to erase African culture. Indigenous languages were banned in schools, African religions were suppressed in favor of Christianity. Traditional governance systems were replaced by foreign administrators. African history was rewritten, portraying pre-colonial Africa as backward and primitive. Generations of Africans grew up believing their own cultures were inferior. The psychological damage of colonialism was as deep as the economic exploitation. The borders drawn during the scramble have caused decades of conflict. Ethnic groups that once lived together were split apart. Rival groups that had historically fought were forced into the same colony. When African nations gained independence in the mid-20th century, they inherited these colonial borders. Leaders faced the choice: redraw the borders or keep them. Most chose to keep them, fearing that changing borders would. The scramble laid the foundation for Africa's economic struggles. Colonial economies were designed to extract resources for Europe, not to develop Africa itself. Railways ran from mines to ports, not between African cities. Education systems trained Africans to be clerks and laborers, not engineers and entrepreneurs. Industries were banned to prevent competition with European manufacturers. When African nations gained independence, they inherited economies dependent on exporting raw materials.